I'd like to start with a question about, for each of you, what does getting it right mean? And we just heard from Julian, so I want to start. I'll start on this end, give you a chance to catch your breath. But Dr. Morsky, when we say getting it right from your world in the food technology and food science world, how do you get it right, or what are some of the challenges that companies face?
Just the one correction. I'm not actually a doctor yet. I'm currently doing my PhD on plant proteins.
Well, you are now. Congratulations.
It sounded really, really good, so hopefully soon. I think for me is getting the functionality of the ingredients and getting the knowledge for whoever is making these ingredients and the product, getting the knowledge how to use them and what they do for the product, and understanding, because the specifications don't necessarily give that knowledge to the product developers at the moment. So then getting the functionality and then getting the right texture and the taste. I think what was already mentioned in a previous presentation, the taste is the king, and that is what we have seen in our research as well.
And Udi, from your perspective, with the work that your company is doing in food technology, especially specific to this area of plant proteins, what does getting it right mean to you?
Really the same as what she just said. For us, it's so important that we take the perspective of a consumer when we produce, when we work on our food. It took us 4.5 years since we first discovered the functionality of a mung bean to put the Just Egg product in its current version, which is the second version, on the market, and that took the expertise of culinary wizards in our team and food scientists and a huge R&D program, because it really is about making it delicious. It's about making a product that, at least in the analog space, so like egg analogues, that people can't tell the difference from regular eggs in most applications, in most contexts. And of course, price and accessibility is key. Being available in the places where people already shop, making it easy, places where people consume in food service, restaurants, etc., and making the price just kind of a no-brainer for folks. That's a work in progress for most of us, given the costs of processing and manufacturing and ingredients. But I think it's the cost, it's the functionality, and it's the overall consumer experience of taste and texture. Yeah.
And Julian, in your presentation, you focused on that, understanding what the consumer really wants and being able to deliver on that. I think it's interesting, the point that you made about the need for simplicity and clean labels and simple ingredients, the comparison you put up between the meat analog product and just the beef burger with the one ingredient. How important is the sustainability or the environmental aspect? I know that Udi this morning talked about that and the concerns about sustainability at a consumer level. Yep. Is that still just a niche, or is that a big deal right now, the sustainability?
No, it's a very good question. Sustainability is the mega trend. It's something that everybody has to take into account in their business, even if it's as simple as changing your packaging to make it as sustainable as possible. It's basically an insurance policy. If you don't deliver on sustainability, you may not be in business 5 or 10 years from now. However, the challenge is, in the mind of the consumer, sustainability means different things to different people. If you ask them that question, you get lots of different answers, coupled with which they receive lots of different messages about what is or isn't sustainable. As I touched upon, there are different arguments. So you have to kind of find which consumer group you want to talk to. You have to find out what their understanding of sustainability is and make sure you deliver on that. So for some people, egg substitutes are perfect. They are justifiably concerned about battery hen production and all the grains they're fed, quite rightly so. Other people won't have that concern, so there'll be a segment of the market that is without egg, and there'll be a segment of market that I can't speak English, that is with egg. And that is, I think, an end product of the fragmentation of consumer beliefs, more fragmentation of markets.
And also, I have questions I can ask, but if you have any questions at all, just raise your hand, and one of us will be happy to come over there with a microphone and give you the opportunity to ask a question of any of our panelists. So just raise your hand and we'll come over there. One of the issues with sustainability and the growth of this market is scalability. You talked about this earlier today, Udi, but how important is that if we see some product take off, but it's made from a plant protein ingredient where the supply chain just isn't developed yet? Is that a concern for any of you, or something we should be thinking about?
It's really a case in point in our case. I mean, Just Egg is the fourth major product category that we've brought to market, but it's the first one made from an ingredient that didn't exist on the market. The first being our mayos and dressings, which are made with pea protein. It's readily available across the market in a way that we could just use right in our production. Sorghum for our raw cookie dough and things like that, instead of eggs. But for Just Egg, we discovered the functionality of mung beans and mung bean protein isolate. So it's it's definitely one of our biggest bottlenecks, and so it's a huge challenge for folks that are bringing in new. It's why so many people are focused on using pea protein and wheat protein and other things like that, because it's available. When it comes to making a new ingredient from a discovery program, which we have and led to this functional ingredient, we have to find new protein processors. We have to find sources of mung beans, which is what I do every day across the globe. And you're dealing with price wars and trading and all of this in terms of agricultural supply. So contract farming, we now become a farming contract organization and work with all sorts of different companies, not just buying ingredients, but working on the ground with agricultural production, because there's a limited supply of mung beans and there's no mung bean protein being used at scale in this way. So that's huge. And then there's always the question of, as a new company, what do we take on ourselves and what do we contract out? At what point do we buy our own protein processing facility, because nobody else is doing the engineering on proteins that we do or that we require in order to have a functional mung bean protein isolate to make the Just Egg product? Those are all the questions that are really, really central to what we do, and then there's the scalability of manufacturing. There's all the distribution questions, and then all the other ingredients aside from the functional kind of emulsifier or gelation agent that is the replacement for eggs. So yeah, that's a key question. But it really, I mean, given the fact that the market is growing so fast and the demand is growing, it's allowing us to have these conversations with the largest protein processors in the world to expand their capacity to create entirely new engineering technologies and potentially buy our own facilities and things like that.
I think there's a lot of other examples of the same issues. Loads of these meat alternatives and other products would be using protein, potato protein, if there was more available. At the moment, there's a very limited supply, but it has really, really beneficial functionality for many of these products, but there's just not a supply for all of the companies who are interested in using that. So there's a definitely need for more new novel ingredients, not just pea and soy proteins that are already widely available. But then at the same time, I don't think a lot of companies even know how to use those to protein, because there's so many different. We saw the presentation earlier this afternoon, and the different pea proteins, the functionality of them is completely different. So then knowing what to buy, I don't know if you have seen a problem in your different mung bean suppliers, if there's any differences in the functionality, but when they are processed, there definitely will be. They will be behaving differently. And at the moment, we don't really have the specifications that we could go for. My background is in baking. Every baker knows what kind of wheat flour they want to buy. They go, okay, I want hard flour. I know I want to get a good bread flour, or I want to get a biscuit flour or cake flour. But what do you ask when you ask pea protein? you can ask certain protein content, but you can't really ask certain functionalities yet that well. And I think that's something that will come.
Just a quick comment on that. That's exactly right. I mean, I as the head of sourcing and identifying sources of mung beans, I have to bring in every single supplier who wants to work with us. We have to get a sample to do a lab scale isolation and functionality kind of review to see if it works in the product.
Yeah.
And I can't say, okay, only this variety of mung bean works, because there are many different varieties.
And everything.
Exactly, and it has to do with growing conditions, and that contributes to the flavor of the isolate and things like that. So it's really a tedious process, but it's one that it's tedious, I think, now because it's the beginning.
Yeah.
And as the knowledge grows, as the work we do grows, the more clarity there will be, and the robustness of the formulations to accommodate different varieties, different conditions, will continue to grow.
Hi. This question is directed to Julian, but if either of you also have some input, I'd appreciate it.
Feel free.
So we are a food tech startup working on meat analog products, and that name is a bit strange. You'll see why as I finish the question. Anyways, the question is, do you have any insight on what it means to have good texture and good taste? I think a lot of people assume that it means a replication of whatever analog is being, like of chicken or of meat. I've asked people, I've given the samples to people and asked them, how is this sample? Do you like it? I asked them that question, and they answer, it is similar or it isn't similar to meat, without me even asking them that. So, yeah.
That's an extremely good question, and I'm not sufficiently expert to say anything particular about taste and texture in any depth. But I think meat analogues are marketed as a nicotine patch for meat eaters. So you have this instead of the nasty meat. And I think the expectation in a lot of consumers' minds is that it should be as close as possible. We did some consumer research on the Beyond Meat burger, and we got people who were pro-plant to go and try it. And they had problems. The taste was okay, but they had problems with the texture. And the sort of comments were, it's nice to try it once, but I won't rush to try it again, because it wasn't close enough to the pleasure experience. These people who like plants had a certain pleasure experience from eating meat, and that's why they still ate some meat, because they wanted that, and the Beyond Burger just didn't deliver it for them. So I think, and I say this very carefully, you probably have to get really close as your target group of consumers want.
And I can add to that. I think the target group is exactly the key. This is just my personal opinion. I quite recently tried a fish product. I have never eaten a fish before because I'm allergic to fish, and I hated it because it was something that I didn't know what it was. It didn't taste okay for me, whereas my colleague was a mixed eater, so eating anything, thought that, oh, this is really close to fish, this tastes good. So it's just, who is your target group? Are you targeting for vegans who haven't been eating meat for a long time? They're not craving for meat. So I think it really depends who is the consumer, and it's difficult to know what they want, and that is the mixed requirements from the market at the moment.
Thank you very much. One more question, Julian. In that same survey that you said that you were involved with, was there a separate question which was, do you enjoy this texture and flavor, period? Not like,
Oh, yes.
I think the question was in the survey that you mentioned is how similar is it to meat? Like,
sorry, we didn't. This particular way, we used a kind of sociological method where you get people to talk freely about their feelings. So you hold the question in the background and you only use them when needed. So you let people just describe in their own words what matters to them. So to try, it's unprompted, if you like, so it becomes a natural conversation. So they all talked about the comparison with meat because they went and ate it. They actually went to a real burger place, and there was meat burgers there, and they were all individually trying it out, and it was largely groups of women in their 20s, actually. Some of them went with their domestic partner, and the domestic partner was usually buying meat and couldn't be persuaded to try the plant-based one. So already in their heads, they had this conception that I'm comparing it with meat because I'm buying it in a meat environment. It looks like meat. I'm eating it in a similar way to meat. So I think that would be quite a challenge to get past that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Julian, I really was intrigued by one of your slides that showed the products that are still meat products, but they have additional plant protein or at least plant ingredients added to them. So I think that sometimes it seems, at least in the U.S., that we focus a lot on that meat substitute, replacing meat, which is a big market and there's a lot of innovation happening, but really interesting to see that meat products are just being supplemented, if you will, with plant-based proteins and plant products. That seems like it could have a wider audience because not everyone, as you said, wants to be a vegan. Some people are going to continue to eat meat, but they just want to get more plants into their diet. Tiia, is that something that your firm is working on, or are you really more focused on just completely substituting for the animal products?
We are, and I think the other example is egg. Lots of companies are looking to reduce eggs, not necessarily replace it completely, but just reducing the consumption of egg. Egg prices are quite expensive, and they also is difficult to predict the market. So a lot of companies at the moment seems to be looking for reduction of egg, not necessarily making the product completely vegan, or maybe that is the long-term plan, but just starting by reducing the egg consumption. And it's a similar story to the meat alternatives, I think.
Do you see a future in that? I know that with your focus on just egg and all of the success you're seeing there, that is actually replacing egg. And I think you said this morning, in some cases, consumers actually prefer it over the egg. But are you seeing an opportunity to not replace all of the egg, or is your focus strictly on that entire, replacing the egg entirely?
Yeah, no, our goal is to replace the egg entirely, and there are, we believe that as long as it's cheaper, it tastes the same or better, and it's just as accessible, that consumers, the majority of consumers, we hope, will choose to purchase it. I think a lot of people will always still want the experience of having an egg and the very specific applications that you might not have with our product, at least not today, but it will have in the future. But what we're seeing is, what's important to understand about at least our company is that we have never marketed to vegans. We've never marketed to vegetarians. We've never emphasized the fact that it's plant-based on the package. It's not clear on the package itself. We say made from plants on on some of our marketing materials online. But it's not in the plant-based food section. It's right next to the real eggs in all the grocery stores. It's in every major grocery store in America. And what we're seeing is, first of all, over 77% of our consumers are meat eaters and egg eaters. 89% are repeat consumers, so they'll buy it multiple times. None of we don't do hardly any paid marketing, except we do a lot of social media, and we're just present on the shelves at every, the major grocery stores and food service. And it's just about the product being delicious. Again, I have to stress that it's really, if we just try to market it to my friends in Northern California who have an interest in sustainability, I think it's going to be a small niche, or at least, as it's growing, but it's growing very, very slowly. So it's really about marketing it to the global community and trying to compete with the mainstream product. And in order to do that, it has to be it has to have just as good of a flavor profile. It has to have accessibility and cost that's competitive. And we're not quite competitive with cost yet, but we have a plan to be so in the next 24 months, to be cheaper than any other major protein product on the market. And I think that's really the key there to success. I personally am not against eggs. I don't think eggs are a bad thing. the way they're produced, the way that the system is set up to produce eggs is terrible and is incredibly unsustainable and is cruel and has a lot of problems, industrially speaking, and so that's the goal, is to be able to have an option for people in China, all throughout mainland China, for people all throughout India, for people all throughout North America and Europe, to have it be just as easy of an option to choose this other more sustainable egg-like product rather than eggs produced from chickens.
Yeah, I find it fascinating, all of the different sources of plant protein that we're seeing now. We talked about pea protein. Soy protein's obviously been around for a long time. We produced that show I mentioned, Natural Products Expo West, in Anaheim, California, every March. And it's a consumer product show. The brands are the exhibitors. We had around 3,500 companies exhibit their brands and around 88,000 attendees, retailers and distributors and buyers and all that. But we track all the products that get displayed at that show, every single one, because they have to tell us in advance what they're going to display so that we can approve it as natural and all of that with our standards. So we have this database of products that get introduced year after year after year in Anaheim. And one of the things that we've been tracking is protein sources. And so from 2018 to 2019 at the show, I just jotted down a couple of stats that we had. We saw big jumps in products introduced with protein from nuts and from legumes. And we actually saw a drop in the number of products exhibiting where the protein came from grains and from seeds. Now, it was still the biggest part of the market compared to the nuts and legumes, but we saw a big shift there. And we also saw this year a significant number of products with algae protein, which was new. There were 70 products out of tens of thousands of products. But I find it fascinating, all the innovation that's going on. I'd like to ask each of you, are there any particular plant protein sources that maybe aren't on our radar yet that you think are up and coming, or something that in the next few years could be the next big thing? The mung bean, until I learned more about your company and the work it's doing with Just Egg, was foreign to me. So are there some other plant protein sources we should be watching?
Yeah, quite a lot. It's hard to know where to start. They're all at a very early phase. So if you take the moringa plant, for example, which is produced in India and Africa, that's already been identified as a good source of proteins and comes in the complete wrap of micronutrients around it. So I think we'll see a lot more activity with that one. And algae is a very good example. It's had lots of challenges because of the texture and the colour, but nutritionally there's a lot of good things to be said about it. So I would put my money on emerging new leaves and things like algae, personally.
Yeah, in our library I've sourced a lot of protein-rich leaves and things like that. Of course, moringa being a leguminous tree, it's in the same family as beans, and it's a question of the application. We tried using moringa, for example, and it's pretty hard to get rid of that green color, and nobody really wants to eat green eggs, for example, if we're going to put a product in the center of the plate, if you will. There are other product applications that could go there with it, though. I think the seaweed is marine plants in general have really fascinating proteins. The proteins have tremendous functionality in food, which we've discovered. Grasses have also, alfalfa, buckwheat, wheatgrass, these kinds of things. Wheatgrass, yeah. So a lot of these plant proteins. Buckwheat has tremendous opportunity, I think, and sorghum and things like that, some of which we've used in products. There really are. It's just a question of what's the application, and that's where you find the functionality that's appropriate. And there's really a lot of opportunity there. And mixing of these proteins is also going to be is a huge opportunity, and it works really nicely. Just finally, there's also an opportunity which we're taking advantage of in the cultured meat space to feed cells plant proteins and plant nutrients instead of fetal bovine serum to grow meat, and that's a huge opportunity that is just emerging.
I think I can just add that, yeah, I agree with all that. There's around 80 different pulse species that are consumed by humans, but at the moment, only maybe 3 or 5 of them are actually commercially available, at least in the Western countries. So I think there will be a significant growth in that area as well. And the key for me is processing techniques, how we learn to utilize those. Soy has gone really long way, and peat, we have learned to process them, learn to how to reduce maybe some anti-nutrients, some unpleasant flavors, aftertaste, all those. Some of the ingredients that were mentioned, like seaweed, doesn't tend to have a really good flavor profile at the moment. But I'm sure that when we learn to process those, find the methods, whatever the method is it maybe through fermentation or some sort of filtration process, we improve the flavor profile of those and improve the technological functionality.
We're coming to the end of our timeout. We have a question right here. Perfect.
Thank you. My question is for Udi. In terms of cultured meat, how do you see the potential growth, let's say, in the next 5 years? And also there are a number of challenges, technical, but also from the consumer acceptance. How do you see the market addressing those challenges? It's a question in terms of size and challenges.
Yeah, I think 5 years is really the number. It's the magic number that we've been talking about for like over a year now. So it's probably 4 years, hopefully. It's a challenge. You know, the biggest challenge right now is cost. I think everything else will kind of come along, but once we bring the cost down. So the biggest challenge, the biggest drivers of cost are the media and the sourcing of the cells, generally speaking. Of course, production, manufacturing, that's a cost as well. It's a rather large cost. But the media at scale is currently way too expensive to have an affordable product. So as we identify, I mean, we're uniquely positioned as one of the leading companies in the cultured meat space because of our plant library and the database that we've built off of the robotics that screen the plants for multiple different functions. And so we're able to use those proteins and nutrients to feed the cells to create a fetal bovine serum free a totally plant-based media to grow to culture the cells and grow them. So that's an opportunity. It's one of the biggest challenges and focuses in the industry is to find a plant-based media. The scaling as well, it'll take a couple of years to get to the point where we're able to scale beyond, say, 1,000 liters in a bioreactor. It's being done. We're currently partnering with large-scale manufacturers to kind of get that going at scale. And then the question is kind of what's the product, what's the market opportunity, and what's the consumer palette for it? And right now, the best opportunity at scale are things that are soft in texture, that don't require a scaffolding or an infrastructure to create like a firm product, like a steak. And some companies, Olive Foods and Memphis Meats, they're working on that as well as we are. We're working on Wagyu beef. In partnership with a Wagyu beef producer in Japan. So we've got their cell lines and we're producing. But the main thing is the first thing that's going to come to market is going to be soft kind of products like foie gras, if you will, which I don't know French, but but we're working on a chicken nugget. So chicken nuggets, we'll probably be the first company potentially to bring a product to market, a cultured meat product to market at scale, and we're looking at chicken nuggets. And, you know, the question of whether or not customers will accept it, that's still up in the air. We don't know. It's hard enough right now. We're working very, very closely with the FDA and the USDA. So first we need regulatory approval. That's the first hurdle. And then which is very, very close. And then getting consumers on board, you know, that will probably require a mixture of just getting the product really right, making sure that it tastes incredible, that you can't tell the difference, that it's super accessible, and also telling the story of how unsustainable meat is. And chicken isn't considered by most consumers to be the most unsustainable meat because it's not. So that's a little bit more of a challenge for this product. But I think it's a mixture of education and then of course the innovation in the production.
All right. Well, we're going to have to wrap up. Before I do that, I just want to be sure that we thank our underwriter for this session, Top Health Ingredients. They're a supplier of non-GMO plant proteins and other ingredients, and you can find them in the exhibit hall in booth 7R180. I also want to mention that if you want to hear some more on this topic, we'll have both Tiia and Udi on a panel tomorrow from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. in the Plant-Based Experience. That's our Plant-Based Experience Pavilion in Hall 7, so you're welcome to head over there. But big thanks to our panelists, Julian, Udi, and Tiia, for your time. We packed a lot into 30 minutes. We appreciate it. There's a lot more to talk about, and I'm sure we'll continue the conversation. And thank all of you for attending.